It is time to abandon the narrow and partial view of what is happening on the Ukrainian-Russian border. Day after day, the great dimensions of the confrontation appear, which is intended to end in changing the status quo since the end of the Cold War, establishing new realities based on the ruins of liberal democracy, and legislating regimes that recognize nothing but force as the regulator of international relations. The rushing Russian tanks and convoys of heavy trucks loaded with missiles and munitions heading towards the upcoming war field, whose pictures are reported by news agencies, are only the vanguards of a project that aims to exploit all the signs of weakness and failure that Western policies have shown for decades, the last of which was the comic/tragic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Ukraine's accession to NATO is not on any urgent agenda and has been discussed for years. But he angered Moscow, however, because Kiev's accession to the alliance would break Vladimir Putin's vision of the world and of Russia's surroundings. Russia accuses the West of ignoring its legitimate security concerns. It says that the Western response to its demands did not address Russia's concern about the possibility of deploying short and medium-range missiles in Ukraine, which can reach the Russian capital without allowing Russian radars to monitor them and activate their countermeasures. The alliance responds that it is defensive in nature and is not in the process of attacking anyone. This is an example of what Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called the dialogue of the dumb with the deaf. But there is another side to the issue, which is that the West not only fails to understand Moscow's concerns, but also fails to adopt an adequate response to its policies. The American writer Anne Applebaum, in an article for her in The Atlantic magazine, identified these elements of Western failure and gave an accurate meaning of what Lavrov meant. Western leaders who negotiate with Russian officials imagine that they will be convinced by the logic of international treaties and agreements concluded between countries and the danger of sanctions that the West may resort to at the level of the livelihood of the average Russian citizen and the local economy is depriving the country of the ability to grow and prosper. That's not the case, Applebaum says. Russian officials are a group that only cares about its immediate interests and not the interests of its country and its people. These interests, which range from sending the children of officials to Swiss schools to buying luxury real estate in London and Miami and laundering money in Western banks, are not threatened by rhetoric based on recalling obligations to respect the independence of smaller and weaker states such as Ukraine. And that if the West wanted to pressure Moscow, it would have to use what the ruling oligarchs group understands there, the deprivation of the wealth and privileges that they and their families enjoy in the West and in the world in general. The reason for this, according to the writer, is that the rule in Russia is a rule of thieves, a kleptocracy, that is only aided by its continuation and survival in its place. As for the suffering of his citizens, he can benefit from it by turning it into a hatred of the West, which will appear as the cause of the tragedy, if the United States and its allies resort to imposing sanctions that affect the Russian economic cycle. We may find the theoretical rooting, so to speak, of the Russian position in the joint statement issued following Putin's visit to China on February 4, which passed without receiving proper attention in the media despite its importance and its foundational nature for the next stage. The very long statement stresses the importance of democracy as a universal value, but in turn places it within the context of the national and local specificities of each individual country and the right of this country to choose the appropriate method to reach democracy without any kind of external interference in its internal affairs. The statement describes a multipolar world with no advantage for any of its poles over the other, not in the economy, in freedoms, or in security. And that none of its countries has the right to guarantee its security at the expense of others. The statement also highlighted that China and Russia oppose every attempt by foreign powers to interfere in the affairs of their neighboring countries under any pretext and reject color revolutions and will increase cooperation in the areas referred to, and this is a clear indication of what happened in Kazakhstan at the beginning of this year and to what is going on in Ukraine. The statement may deserve a separate and expanded reading as it is the clearest statement of a common vision of the world as wanted by Putin and his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, who is no less passionate about power. It is not surprising that the statement focused on democracy as a universal value. This is because what the two presidents mean is the democracy of the ballot boxes that will perpetuate their systems, and not the democracy that is bound by laws and the balance of powers and their control over each other. It has become known that the liberal democracy espoused by the West is experiencing a deep crisis, which is reflected in the rise of the extreme right and populist parties on the right and the left, in addition to the desperation of large groups of citizens for a meaningful change that prevents the exacerbation of the phenomena of class inequality and social marginalization. On the other hand, the democracy of Putin and Xi does not recognize liberalism as a component of democracy as long as the process of choosing the ruler proceeds smoothly within the framework of a formal process of dropping votes at the ballot box. This is what a large number of world leaders or strongmen cheer for, who see that the presence of their people at the top of power is the guarantee of their country's future. Therefore, it is necessary to put the Ukrainian-Russian crisis in its grand context as part of an attempt to change the future of the world in a direction that makes the interests of